This is not a matter of race, ethnicity, location, discrimination. This is a matter of wildlife safety and human safety, and shutting down all wet markets in all nations across the globe. A wet market is typically an open-air market where both meats and animals are kept in cages and on display, typically not refrigerated with no ice, so that people can come in this open-air market and individually pick out what things they want to take home with them. People need to be aware that wet markets are not an Asian-only thing. This is not just happening in China or specifically in Wuhan. This is happening all over the place. It's happening in Africa. It's happening in European nations. It's happening in Asia. And they're all dangerous. It doesn't matter where you are. If you are mixing wildlife, if you're poaching it from the wild, one, it's terrible for the species. But two, if you're mixing all these animals with things that we consume as food source, you are going to have problems. And that's how zoonotic disease gets started. They are a vector for disease. It's where zoonotic diseases like Ebola and SARS and of course COVID-19 have originated from. And that's because you have all of these mixing of bodily fluids and blood and tissue and feces all coming together from these animals being stacked in unsanitary conditions and mixed with meat that ends up going into human consumption. So wet markets are a danger, not just for the wildlife that's getting poached, but for people that are consuming food from those wet markets. In Zanzibar, at the Stone Market, I've seen these meat markets where everything from pork and chicken and beef is cut up and on display, unrefrigerated, to giant tiger sharks being hacked to pieces and stingrays with cigarette butts being put out on them, and piles of fish, and they're all kept on these open stone kind of displays in 110-degree heat where they're basically rotting and all mixing together, and you come along and pick various things. In Indonesia, I've seen the wildlife markets where they go out into the wild and they catch all the animals they can and they cage them and they put them on display. Now these cages are stacked one on top of another, so if one animal defecates, that mixes with the animal below it. And sometimes those animals are used for consumption, other times they're used for pets, other times they're used for, good omens. It's a whole mix of things. I don't believe we should ever censor reality. And the reality is, when you see these horrific images of animals being caged and abused and wild creatures being chopped up for meat and medicine, it is supposed to strike an emotion. And that emotion, use it. Don't hide from it. Don't be scared of the reality of what's going on and bury your head in the sand, but instead embrace it and realize how terrible this is and how we can combat it. Black market wildlife trade is a huge multi-billion-dollar market, and as supply and demand dictates, the more rare something becomes, the more valuable it is. We need to rally against this, and what that means is being conservation-minded, whether that's just not using a plastic bag at the grocery store or going online and signing petitions to close down wet markets or not visiting places like Joe Exotic's Tiger Kingdom or whatever it's called. These are the steps that we can take by educating ourselves. That's the first step. And understanding where the problem comes from. Then we can avoid the problem. And I like to say this, it's not about one person doing conservation perfectly. It's about everybody doing it imperfectly that'll make a huge global change.